All right, we are live, and I had so much fun making that intro this morning, because why not put some rock and roll? So welcome to Unpack the Stack, and with me I have Daniel. Dude, how are you?
Hey, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here. I've got to say, it is cold and rainy. It's a hard autumn already where I'm based. So I'm glad to be here with a mug of tea and a chance to unpack some stuff.
I'm actually here. Wait, I need to remove this for a sec. I'm here with some jam because I just recorded a JAMstack video. So no tea for me. Somehow there's some jam involved. And for us, I think there was 17 or 18 millimeters of rain yesterday alone. So
yeah,
fall has started, I guess.
Certainly falling from the sky, that's for sure.
Yep. So before we dive into this and unpack a lovely stack that you are coming up with, we tend to just first, maybe you can explain who you are, where you're from, what you do, and then we dive into some industry news, and then off to the races, whatever we want to discuss. How about that? Maybe you start first.
Okay, sounds great. So I'm Daniel, Daniel Rowe. I'm on the Nuxt team. So I get to do lots of really cool things around web frameworks. Nuxt is a framework for building web apps. It's designed to be progressive. So you can start with very little configuration, no configuration. You can build an app based in Vue, and then you can do whatever you want on top of that. We prioritize user interface, user experience from a dev point of view, and best practices built in. And I could say lots of other things. We're currently building Nuxt 3, which is very, very close to being released as a stable version. And there's some great fun things in there I'd love to show you.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. And like you said, you can do a lot of things with Nuxt. I certainly did. I did lots of things with Nuxt, from huge enterprise builds to tiny projects, and it just remains working. So that's very, very cool. But more on that later. Let's talk a little bit about some of our industry news. And Daniel, feel free if you have anything you want to, chime in. Let's do that. So first, this one was fun. Like, I didn't feel like, hey, we're just going to look at like Next versus Nuxt and stuff. Let's just do some proper front-end things. And so this one is that I think it's a Google release, but I'm not sure if it's Google that did this. But we have something called color fonts with a color v1 API. And if you look at that URL, when you go there, you see so much fun things, or so many fun things with like different gradients that you can give on letters, and it's going to get crazy. I'm almost worried we're going to get Flash-like animations with these things, but I guess that's a fun one, and so that kind of it's enjoyable. And then the next one, this is actually from Smashing Magazine, from Juan Diego, and this is an article I saw in so many newsletters. So I thought, we're probably going to have to put that in, because especially when you work with PWAs and you're going to kind of mimic, native apps. This is a very interesting one, because there are so many JavaScript APIs out there that we don't really know, but you can kind of just use them. And the one that stood out to me is actually when you have your phone and it can detect how light it is outside. And if it's dark, it can switch your phone to dark mode or whatever. And there's a bunch of other ones. So Daniel, have you used any of these before?
I've used the web sharing API. I think that's pretty straightforward. I mean, I guess that they're all surprisingly straightforward. Internationalization API as well, I think, is pretty good. And the page visibility API, but I've not tried the broadcast channel one.
Same here.
And I bet there are more interesting ones on that. I love the idea of the sort of light detection, dark light detection based on
It's
your
cool, right?
environment.
And they have other things as well now where you can select a contact from your contacts lists on your phone, but it's really protected. So you can actually say you want to share only the name and the email, and you can only select one and stuff like that. And so they're kind of working on all these new things to kind of make the web more app-like, I guess, which is pretty cool.
I mean, I absolutely love it. That kind of granular control, giving the control back to the user, but exposing just what the user means to expose to the app
Yes.
is great.
And there's also something I saw on a conference I spoke at the other day, where you have a lot of inbound things, like when you have a URL with a specific protocol, not HTTP, but maybe Twitter or something, or whatever you come up with, maybe Daniel, and then that could and then open your web app, right?
Yeah.
There's all these extra things. So these APIs are really, really fun. Then we have the Web Almanac 2022. So Web Almanac is by HTTP Archives, and it's a huge bit of research looking at like all the stats they get from the archive, but also the trends in the community. And it was so big, I scrolled through it, and then it was so deep, I almost just stopped. It's like I could use a week. But I want to know, because there's one chapter on performance and it's still grayed out. You're not able to see it yet because I think they're still working on it. So, Daniel, what do you think? Are all the websites fast by now, or is it still just the small selection of awesome ones?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of weird things, and that is that the space in which you and I are working, Tim, is actually really
Yeah,
small. That
true.
like the vast bulk of the web is even still running on WordPress. If you're looking at number of sites, for example,
True.
and
Very
that's
true.
not. I'm not saying something negative about WordPress, by the way, but it's not necessarily where you think if you happen to be working in the JavaScript ecosystem and you're focusing on the shiny new framework.
Exactly.
So it's really interesting when you look at a big picture, and I think the HTTP archive are in a great position to do that, just because of the sheer amount of data that they've
Yeah,
got.
and they seem to
So,
be quite impartial, which I kind of like. They're not super idealistic in that sense of, oh, maybe React is or PHP is better or whatever, right? It's kind of just this plain thing, which is cool. I like that.
and I mean, I think looking at the data is really important because it's easy, I think, to be working within a niche, whether that's
Yeah.
React or Vue or something else, and you're working to optimize and make things better, as far
Yeah.
as you have got constraints, and actually stepping outside and thinking, where are we as an ecosystem? How are we doing? About our aims of shipping JavaScript to the client. We want to do as little of that as possible. How are we doing with
Yeah.
that? How are we doing with our commitment to making sure things are machine readable, server rendered?
Exactly. All
Anyway,
these things. Like also one of the things that stood out to me when I looked at that report is that 97% of websites has like third-party libraries on it, which
it's
is
terrible.
likely just all this JavaScript that is being pushed down the throats of the users that make things slow, right? And then maybe not even using HTTP2 for it. It's amazing.
There's such low hanging fruit. I think
Yeah.
optimizing third party scripts, and it's why I'm excited about things like Partytown.
Yeah.
We have an upcoming a Nuxt scripts module where we're trying to tackle some of these things as well.
Oh, interesting.
Because there are every script and every implementation of or integration with a particular provider has to face the same questions over and over again. Things like, how do I respect the user's preferences? How do I want to load the script, but obviously I don't want to load the script if the user has explicitly said they don't want. So how do I do that? What if the user said do not track, and I have a tracking script? How do I? And every single script has to implement that separately, and that is
Exactly.
duplicated code. And then, often these scripts, you want to track what the user is doing, but you don't want to get in the way of them engaging with the site. So you have to defer it. You have to move it to a later point in time. You don't want to block the main thread. How do you make that interaction good? And so, for example, with Nuxt, we've got lots of integrations. We have a Google Analytics integration. There's a Tag Manager integration. And the same is true for pretty much any third-party library that might inject a script. And rather than have each one of those libraries figure out how to do things like loading at the appropriate point on the client side once everything else has happened and the browser has an idle moment. Actually centralizing that and offering that via a Nuxt scripts module makes a huge amount of sense.
Very interesting. I think Next.js did some work towards that, but I'm not sure if they looked at like one way to kind of do the same things as you did now. Oh, that's very interesting.
So, I mean, they have different loading strategies for scripts.
Exactly, that's what they did, yes.
Which is, I would say, probably lower level than what I'm talking about at this point, because it's the idea is effectively a platform that provides utilities that then modules and other integrations can use, as well as, of course, a user at the end of the day.
Exactly.
But I'm sure some of the same strategies we'll use in terms of thinking about how you want to load a script, but you want to load it at a certain point afterwards. And there'll be different stages where a script might make sense to load earlier than another script. Now,
Exactly.
Partytown is great. I don't know if you've explored Partytown or
Not
or
really.
used it at all.
No, I don't actually know that any well. So what they do? Oh, wow, Friday. What do they do?
So Partytown basically runs third-party scripts in a web worker, which means they don't block the main thread, which means you get a smoother interaction. Obviously, there's still the same amount of CPU time.
Yes.
But the point is it's non-blocking, right?
Well, it's parallel now, right?
Yeah. So there are some challenges because the way Partytown works is that it makes a fetch request for the script. So it can't be used out of the box with scripts that don't set the appropriate cause headers.
Oh, exactly.
Which is a pain if you're trying to adopt it. There is now actually a public Partytown proxy server that will allow you to do this even with mainstream things like Google.
You can wait for that to happen, right? Because people just don't have these cores and you cannot just ask a company to fix it.
So but anyway, it's definitely worth a try. And in Nuxt, of course, you can have your own proxy as well as use a public one.
Oh, we'll dive into that at one point. That sounds very interesting. Let's see what else we have. Oh, this one was fun. So this is kind of CSS Tricks is always good with these kind of articles about like performance related things because everybody wants GIFs, but they're horrendous for your performance, especially on phones and stuff. And so they like have a whole article about all the other ways you could do a GIF. And they actually even mentioned Twitter has a GIF button, right? And you add the GIF and they play a video, which is kind of funny. Which makes sense because videos are much more performant. And in this article, they also go into like WebP with animations and AVIF with animations. And they're kind of saying if you use an image that is highly optimized and then animates, you can use native lazy loading and the way you can decode and encode it. And so this is like almost as old as the web of finding a nice way. Like I remember, I'm not sure if you did that, Daniel, where I would literally just grab frames from a video and load these up lazily and put them on a canvas and then play it like it was a video player. Right? Those kind of things actually perform better than the GIF itself.
Exactly. That might sound like a bad idea, but actually it's better.
You know what? Not at all. I even did one, but that was really highly experimental with a BPG file, which is like some highly optimized file format made by a French guy, and that now became H.265. That was a pre-version of that. And so I had a PPG file that I could render from a video, and all the frames would go into that file, and I used a web worker to parse it and then play the thing. And so the performance was pretty good. But back in the day, these web workers, like it was slow and you still had a flash and not all browsers could do it, but you can go deep with this stuff. It's good fun.
Yeah.
But the unpacking and packing of something on the browser thread was, of course, not really smart. But these are modern ways to do it. Sometimes I think I'm too old. I have done too many things there's so much information in there that you don't need anymore now. But yeah, there you go. I love that we have some innovation in this part. And so this one is yours, Daniel. Talk about this one.
A familiar name. So
Exactly.
Magic Regex. It's a project to improve writing and using regular expressions. So we all love them. They allow us to do pretty much anything, but they condense a huge amount of information into those two slashes. And there are also some footguns. So it's possible to end up in situations where you aren't exactly sure which numbered index matches which pair of brackets in the regular expression
Yeah.
because you added an extra one and you're really not quite sure exactly where it goes. Or maybe you have a global regular expression and you're accidentally tracking state in it. There are some pain points.
Yeah.
So Magic Regex allows you to write regular expressions using a more natural syntax. So you can just use chainable utilities. It compiles out of your app. So when you actually build your app, it is replaced with a literal regular expression. But when you're using it, you get type-safe access to named and anonymous groups. You get
man, it's so nice.
best practices built in even. So sometimes, for example, if you're like me, you often write a regular expression and you just put the sort of normal group, the brackets around something because you need to match it. In fact, that's slightly less performant than using the non-capturing specifier, which is a question mark colon. Magic Regex defaults to that, so it will actually be slightly more performant than if you're just writing it by hand without adding them. So there's some really lovely things that are quite fun, and then there's some neat tricks. So if you hover over the query builder, it will actually show you in a TypeScript hover what the regular expression is that is being generated. And when you are actually accessing, say, those anonymous groups like match index 3, hover over it and it will show you what bit of the regex it's matching. And if it knows more, like if it's a string literal or something, it can actually tell you it's going to be this.
And so
and
how
if
do
you try
you
and
do that? Is
access,
that TypeScript based or something? Or
it's all TypeScript. It is all
Wow.
all the power of TypeScript. So it is so much fun to write in the first place. And I particularly would like to shout out David Tai, guy who has been contributing a lot in the project and has built some of the really cool type inference stuff that we've done.
It's a pretty geeky thing, and you made it less geeky, or at least more accessible. Because I'm one of those, okay, I need one, I'll figure it out for half an hour, put it in my code, and then forget about it and never touch it again. But that's not particularly safe, right? And so if you have something like this, it's a lot nicer.
I think that's the idea. So you come back to it and you don't have to try and figure out exactly what the regular expression is doing. It should be more
exactly, because not everybody is that abstract minded, right? A lot of people are more into how pixels move and things like that. So it's great to have something like this. And then you added another one, which is Fonten. I think that sounds French to me.
It does sound French, which means I probably shouldn't be allowed to use it. But
yeah,
at least
you're fine.
You're in France at the moment, aren't you, Tim?
I am,
so,
yes.
So you can be the authority on how to pronounce it.
Oh my God, I'm going to go Google Translate right now. I know. So tell us more. What does this do exactly?
So this is for if you're using web fonts, whether that's hosted in your own project or somewhere else, but you're using a TrueType font or a WAF or something like that. And if you're following best practices, you have font display set to swap. So the idea is the page loads, you can see the content, then the web font is downloading, and when it downloads, the browser swaps it out for whatever the fallback font is that it's using to display it, which might be Times New Roman or Arial or something like that. And the problem is that the web font you're using is probably beautiful and lovely and not the same as Times New Roman. So it results in this sort of shift of content on the page as suddenly everything moves up or down, sideways, as everything adjusts. And that affects your CLS score in your Web Vitals, so your layout shift. And it also, and that's of course trying to capture the effect on the user who suddenly sees the content move around. That's not a nice thing to experience.
Clearly not.
So what we can do, this uses some great tools. So there'll be lots of shout outs, but what it does is it calculates the font metrics of the web font you're using. So how how high do the ascenders go? How low do the descenders go? How much space does it take up on the page? And it applies those metrics to your fallback font. So it is able to generate a font declaration for your local font. That means it takes up the same space on the page as your web font. So when it loads, although there is still a flash as it changes from one font to another, it doesn't move the page up and down, and it can dramatically decrease your CLS. The whole thing operates statically at build time. So it basically it sees what fonts you use, it injects the right rules, it sees when you use those font families, and it injects the right rules there.
Wow.
And it pretty much automatically can give you, well, in the demo project, which is just a very simple page of text, normal text, no particular tricks. It takes you from a 92 to a 100 page speed, just sort of automatically. And it works on any framework. I tried it on Next.js this morning. There's a Nuxt module for it as well. It works on pure Vite, which is what the demo project is in the repository. Check it out.
This is crazy. So I'm going to ask a nerdy question because this is Unpack the Stack and this fits in our next subject. So how do you actually figure out the width and the height of the letters of that font and the kerning and the line height? Because lots of fonts are kind of shitty and then the line height is okay, but then the font is slightly higher, not in the center. So how do you figure these things out? Do you actually render it in a canvas in memory and then measure things, or how does that work?
So it uses, and this is what I was talking about, some pretty cool tools. I don't know if you've come across Capsize.
No.
So Capsize is a post-CSS, well, Capsize is a way of talking about font metrics and injecting CSS to mean that when you're styling fonts, it behaves the same in your web canvas as it does in your designer's canvas. So
Okay.
one of the things that we find frustrating as users is, or as developers interacting with designers, is that the web doesn't. If you select some text or if you draw a border around some text, there's weird bits and margins where you don't expect there to be any. And so if you're trying to lay something out and align it with something else, you often find yourself having to add like an extra pixel or something in order to make it, or subtracting it, or and Capsize is a way of, you don't have to do that anymore. It generates the right font rules for the different size of and metrics of font you use, so that exactly the box around the font exactly aligns to the baseline of the font and the height of the font. So it is just a fantastic tool. I wrote a post-CSS plugin for it, post-CSS Capsize, and check out Capsize as well. I probably should have told you this in advance, and you could have a slide for it.
Yeah, we could have put a slide in, because I'm a pretty much a typography nerd, and the things you just mentioned, that's like the nemesis, and I kind of just let it go. Like I'll just
never go back. Things, well, right? Like for the inner perfectionist in all of this, in all of us, this is perfect. And it genuinely does make the interaction between the designer and the developer so much better, because the designer is like, this is what it should look like. It needs to be, it needs to fit these. Anyway, it particularly when it comes to alignment, like if you're looking at a button and you have like an icon and some text, if you are detail orientated, and even if you're doing, the best practices in aligning a div centrally, the text will not be central. Like you feel it should be, but it's always a matter of a couple of pixels. If you're using Capsize, it will be centered. It actually will be centered.
That's very interesting, because I remember back in the day, like I worked on these. Well, we spoke about this a little bit before, on these brands that were completely like typography first, based on their image, and then we had a creative director who used to teach typography in Berlin at the university. So this guy is like full on. And he basically just made us learn all these things and go very specific. So all the rules and all the typography, everything was matching with the rhythm. And then we would have spent weeks, and then we showed him the thing. We made a whole kind of like, I don't know, it's like a CSS framework back then. If you just applied it, all the typography would have the right rhythm with the line heights, and then he's like, yeah, that's crap. Like, what? Why? Now that you have it perfect, now start tweaking it so it's no longer perfect and it looks good to the eye. It's like, are you kidding me? And so you're gonna have to, but if you have the tools to make it very solid, like the Capsize and Fonten that you just made, then you can start tweaking and make it look good. So it's interesting. And I think this is also a good bridge. Or sorry, maybe you wanted to say something first.
Well, so Capsize is fantastic, but the reason I mentioned it is that they built some tools to expose these font metrics and to allow you to get them yourself from the metadata within the font file. So, which is brilliant, because we're not actually using Capsize for this project for Fonten. What we're using it for is to get the metrics. So they have extracted metrics from basically Google fonts, lots of Adobe fonts, I think, as well. And so we don't even have to look at the source. And they also,
it's just a database with metadata that you can use.
It's exactly, there's a huge database with metadata. But I mean, you can also use query the actual font data within the font. And so you can actually give it can, there's a Capsize OSS Unpack library, which you can point at a URL or a file on disk, and it can actually read it and extract the information from it. It's within the file, but you have to look at it. So it needs to be needs a build step basically in order to get that. So yeah, this project would have been a lot more complex without Capsize.
Oh, clearly, because you would have been doing the things I just mentioned. Maybe you can render it in memory somehow in a DOM and then measure it out and then wait for the life cycle of the browser to change so it actually renders. Like, I've been around the block with that. So having that, very nice, very nice. So we're going quite fast in the time. Let's move on to our main subject, which is kind of related to what we're talking about now anyways. So what did you actually want to unpack today?
So it's one of the, it's a project called Nuxt.new. Obviously, a lot of the time I'm building Nuxt itself, but this was quite a fun little treat. The team at Nuxt Labs designed this landing page for starting a new Nuxt project.
You maybe want to share your screen and show it off?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
I will share my screen and show it off. Here is the project, Nuxt.new.
There it is. Awesome.
So Nuxt.new is it's a way of starting a new Nuxt project. It's got we have 3 starters there at the moment. There's some more stuff coming, which I can't tell you about yet. But that's the only reason this isn't open source yet, because I wouldn't want to give any spoilers by looking at the code. And this was just super fun to do. So working directly with a design canvas, not a hugely complex project. This is a day's project, a day's work. Yeah, but it was fun. And so actually, Nuxt font metrics started out for this, which is the project that became Fonten. Because obviously you see these beautiful web fonts. And so if I now refresh the page, I'll do a hard refresh. You should see there's
you see a flicker for sure.
But the flicker is just the width. It's the boldness. What you shouldn't see flicker is the height. Because we're doing this font override. And in fact, if you were to look at that font, you should be able to see that what we've done here is inject. You see lots of Tailwind stuff going on. We've injected.
So I don't think it's actually sharing your term, like your.
Rats! That's a pain.
Yeah,
I was just going to take you all the way into
right?
the web inspector view. I probably could. I'll see if I can share my. I'll
sure.
share my entire window. If you want, I'm not sure if you particularly want to dive in, but
we're unpacking the stack, my friend.
We're unpacking it. Okay.
Exactly.
So basically, in your actual in the font that we're looking at here, you can have a look at the we have, you see the font family as it was originally written as just Robot Pro.
Yeah.
And the library interjects this Robot Pro override.
Okay.
If we want to inspect what it's doing, you can have a look. These are the WAFs. We're just going to block them so they don't load.
Yeah, there is a relatively easy way to do it, but I always forget.
Why is it not? Oh, this is Chrome. I'm normally used to Firefox, and we want to block these.
I think if you just find it, you can probably block it from there.
Yeah, block. I will block all three.
Exactly.
Nice. Thank you, Tim. I don't know what I would do without you. So now what we're seeing is that somehow we're falling back to we're falling back to normal WAFs.
Oh, but these are likely because they're on your machine?
No, because it had WAF2 and then WAF. Two different formats which expand the browser. So now what you're seeing is the version without the web fonts.
Exactly.
What's now being displayed is this override that we've constructed.
Okay.
If we actually dive into the CSS for the page, it doesn't exist as a separate file because of something else. But you should be able to see, we can talk about in a second. But you should be able to see that we have a font family that we've generated here, Robot Pro override. It's got an ascent override, a descent override, and a line gap override. And those things basically mean that we are able to output a line that has the same dimensions as the custom font that we would otherwise display.
I would say raise your hand if you don't know what ascent override is, or if that even existed. The fact that exists is amazing,
isn't it? And the support is not as bad as you might think. So if you have a look at can I use, it's going to work in more browsers than you might think. If it's not supported, then you're just getting the same swap that you got before. But if it is supported,
which is fine.
Yeah, and it works in page speed. So you'll see that lovely 100 in that green circle. So that's part of it. So basically, the Fonten injects all of the CSS that's required, which is not much. It's basically this, and then it's the extra Robot Pro. Sorry, it's this, and then the extra Robot Pro override in every time you use font family Robot Pro. So
okay, and so that override, is that actually like a file that it creates?
No, it doesn't create any file at all. It's just a name. So if you have your font face declaration, you can pick any name you want, and it will then mean that when you use font face that name, it will look at the rules that you put in place here in the font family and use them. So normally, if you're just using your custom font, you have something like this, and it points to a URL. It has the font weight that matches the URL, maybe a couple of formats.
Exactly.
And this local override, it has these custom metrics. And then it has, instead of pointing to the web font, it points to your local font. Mm-hmm. So we have, I have quite a long fallback list here.
Yeah.
So you have the native system font, basically. In this case, I think it's probably falling back to Arial. So it's pulling up the local Arial font, the one that's on your computer. It's forcing it to the local. But then it's applying these metrics. And it actually doesn't matter which font is loaded. The metrics will override any font to be the right size. So it's so satisfying. So satisfying.
It is extremely satisfying, but it feels a little hacky to me.
Tim, is there no satisfying you? That is the question.
But you know what? This is actually, if we had this years ago, I would have impressed all my buddies where we had to do all this stuff. And now we just have it. And you know what? We likely had it before, but we just didn't know. This is crazy.
So there you go. It makes a difference, I think.
It does. And yeah, so the width is only slightly different, but not much.
The width is different. That's the next step, basically. It's a little bit more complex to calculate this, but there is a property called size adjust, I believe, which allows you to expand the letter. The thing is that every letter is different. So
exactly.
The height is fine because that's font wide, but the size adjust value would depend on calculating like an average value based on the alphabet that's used in the project.
Yeah.
And then it's not going to be perfect, but it will make it better. So if you look at the sort of the in this particular case, we're just hitting that line wrap. I don't know if you can capture that at all, but there's an extra word that sometimes appears on the third line.
Oh, because it's due to some letters, it might be slightly wider, and therefore it. Yeah, exactly.
And I think what we can do with size adjust is avoid that entirely.
Yeah, and that's the most important part, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest gain is just from the height, because already like the difference is huge, and in most cases that's everything you need to do. But it's when you're talking about blocks of text that are aligned and right up at the bound, then you absolutely have to do, because if you have an extra line, that's obviously going to completely throw you off. So that's the next step. But
it's a very geeky project, and I love it, and I'm gonna try it for sure. This is very cool. The interesting thing is, though, like when I build my own sites and stuff, I don't tend to see that swap as much. But now I'm thinking I might have these font files locally, so it never shows it for me.
It never shows you. Well, I mean, and if even now, if I just hit refresh, you probably can't see any difference in the page at all, because it's cached. Exactly. You actually have to do that Command Shift R to force the refresh. And to be honest, even then, you can't see it most of the time. You probably have to go and throttle your connection speed right down. I did this so often, and do a hard refresh, and then you can see it come in at the one level, and then load and load, and then swap out.
So cool.
But apart from that, it's really hard to tell. But you never know who is using your project and how they're accessing it.
Yeah, totally true.
Kind of connection.
Completely right.
So this can make it more usable. Imagine for a moment.
Gives me inspiration, man. I'm gonna try this. Yes, it's cool. And so with this project, with the Nuxt.new, you also told me that you were looking, of course, at performance-related things, right? And some of the things you found out in this project, you actually pushed back into Nuxt, right? So these things became features.
So if you look at the files loaded by this site, what we have here is we have some images. These are I think this is just the fave icon.
Yeah, looks like it based on and these come from Nuxt image, I imagine, looking at the URL.
Yes. So we do use Nuxt image in the site. We also use the new PWA module from Kevin Morrick.
Oh, I haven't tried that yet. Oh, cool.
So it basically generates icons of the appropriate size that you can add to a manifest. So in this particular case, this little manifest here would allow you to install this as an app on your phone. Exactly. And it also does interesting things. If you're on a mobile, it will theme the site for you. So the tab is the Nuxt green as opposed to just your normal tab. So there's some nice little features there. But apart from that, the only things that are being loaded are event. Oh, that's telling somebody that someone's loaded the site.
That looks like it's from Plausible potentially.
It's plausible.
Yeah.
We've got a couple inline SVGs, web fonts, and actually there's nothing else. There's no CSS.
That's crazy.
There's no CSS. There's no JavaScript. This site is entirely one HTML page, and you could block everything else, and the images would still load. They are inlined as a sprite. The code would still work. So it's without JavaScript, but it's still interacting with your clipboard.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, it's without JavaScript in one way. It's all inlined, right? So this particular
Oh, there's
situation.
inline JavaScript.
So it's obviously built with Nuxt. It's built with Vue, but there is, and basically here, this button has an
Yeah.
on-click handler. Do you remember writing on-click
Oh,
handlers?
yes, certainly did.
Yeah. So it actually has an on-click handler to add some text to the clipboard.
And so this you literally just typed in your HTML, I imagine.
It's actually dynamic. It's bound. So I mean, obviously, in the generated HTML, it's just written in. But in the actual source code, these are components, and they are rendering.
So these are few components with proper events bound.
Yeah, they have everything else, but it's rendering into something that is zero JavaScript.
And did you do something custom for that, or is that something that Vue just does?
So to render the
like how does it know to put the on click there with that string that you put in? Because I can imagine with Babel it could work, but then it's all like very different.
Vue just does that. You can basically bind a string value to an on-click handler. And
exactly.
It will put it there. But the fact that we're rendering no JavaScript bundle is something that that I built a module for the project, but we now have support for in Nuxt itself.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's a really good workflow, by the way. And I probably for this project built, I don't know, 4 or 5 modules, just local modules. So you create a modules directory and then stick files in it as you go. It allows you to separate out the features and functionality and changes to Nuxt into a single place for each feature, which means you can then easily copy it to another project if you're doing something else, or open a PR to Nuxt and say, hey, here's this thing, or publish it if there's a use case and other people would benefit from it. But it was really straightforward to make it zero JavaScript. And then that actually, if you want to see the actual code, there is Nuxt 0.js.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting how you did that, because you probably have some payloads and you kind of just have to, make files for them rather than API
so
calls.
This is not exactly now how it's implemented in Nuxt, but this is as simple as it is to do it. I basically injected a Nitro plugin from a module, and that Nitro plugin basically hooked into the render HTML hook and removed everything. That's it.
Oh, you just let Nuxt render everything, and afterwards you just remove it.
Yep.
That's the power of Nuxt hooks for you. Why not, right?
It's super simple and it works. Now, how we actually implemented it in Nuxt was better, I think. So Nuxt itself is able to render no JavaScript with a let's see if I can pull up the
because Nuxt 2 had an option for it. I actually have used it on my website back in the day.
So here, in order to render no scripts, is this clear enough for you, by the way? In order to render
a tiny bit. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. We basically only have to do this. This is even simpler than the implementation in my module. It's always better to try it out first and then implement it.
Oh, clearly,
time will always be better.
You need a patient zero for this stuff.
Yeah. When you build a Nuxt project, it produces a client manifest, either a Webpack one or a Vite one, and it's how the server knows what URLs to inject into the HTML, because they're hashed, for example.
Yeah.
And the server is different. The server has a different kind of bundle, and they don't have the same file name. So how does it know what to inject? So there's this manifest. And so all we do is we just go through and remove all the JavaScript from the manifest, which means as far as the server is concerned, there is no JavaScript. So it will still inject everything.
It's just never put in, basically.
Just never rendered into the HTML, which is a lot better. It's at build time, and it is So to be honest, no JavaScript is not for most projects. So if you have a multi-page site, the benefits to injecting JavaScript and having a bundle are huge in terms of user experience and having a seamless interaction between pages, and obviously interactivity on the page. Lots of reasons to have JavaScript. But sometimes you need something without it. And in this particular case,
Well, this is a
page like
one-pager, so you really
why
don't
does
need it.
Why does it need JavaScript? It doesn't need JavaScript. This is just giving you links to out to projects that you might want to use. And the one thing that is interactive, which is the copying of the command, well, you really don't need to have Vue to do that. That's just a simple.
Exactly. And you have plausible for analytics that you just inject in the head, basically.
Yeah, it works really well.
So
we do also, this is also a hybrid site. I don't know if you can tell, but if you have a look at the headers for the page, you should be able to see, this is hosted on Vercel.
Yeah.
And you should see it has this X-Vercel cache, which tells you that this is on the CDN.
Yes.
And it has an E tag, right? So this is not generated. This is not a dynamic SSR site. This is cached.
It's basically a static file with an E tag saying this is what this file is.
But if you have a look at this link, for example, so this link is to, I'll just hover over it maybe. You can see it's to nuxt.new/c/v3.
Exactly.
So I'm going to take us there in a moment, but I'll just preserve the log so we can inspect the headers for it, right? So let's get rid of those and click this StackBlitz link. Rats, new page.
Oh yeah, because it goes to a new tab.
If only I could.
You can do an inspect and remove the target link probably from the elements.
That's a very good idea.
Oh, that's very hacky, but why not?
Yeah,
here, target blank, you can remove it.
There we go. Okay, let's have a look and see what happens when I click it. So basically, that link, it's obviously it's a redirect. It's taking us to StackBlitz.
Oh, it's a 302, yeah, okay.
But what's actually happening here is it's still coming from Vercel, but this is actually rendered by Nuxt. This is being hit by the Nitro server, which is running at the same time. So this is a hybrid deployment. It has got server endpoints powered by Nitro and static pages that are pre-rendered and don't need to be.
And so Nitro only does the redirect, like smartness or something?
So yeah, we only need it for the redirects. We don't need it to render this page, which is straightforward. So yes, we have got these redirects. So C for Code Sandbox, S for StackBlitz, and then the slug that it matches. And then the server route interacts with the same database that's rendered these starters, which is from a data set. So it's not these are not hard coded in. And so it's then able to inspect that and see where to set, like what kind of URL we need to construct for StackBlitz and Code Sandbox.
Oh yeah, because it goes to a StackBlitz starter that you have set up separately. So, but it needs to know where to go from your data set, basically.
Yeah, they're both using the GitHub integrations with Code Sandbox and StackBlitz. So if you go there, the URL that you see is based on GitHub. A branch and a repository, and so that's where it's going to go. And the same is true of StackBlitz.
Yeah.
And to be honest, this is not, you don't need this.
That was my next question: is why? Because you can just in your data set hard code that URL and be happy, right?
We absolutely we could actually just render this as a href to Code Sandbox and StackBlitz, but honestly,
it wouldn't be as fun.
It wouldn't be as fun.
Exactly.
And we might switch back to that at some point if it's better. But I wanted to play with a Nitro hybrid site, and it's really simple. And one of the things people might not know about in a Nuxt project, you can have this server API folder, and any file you place in there gets turned into an API route, something like this. A test.ts gets turned into API test.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you can also have a server routes folder. And any file in that gets turned into a server route, but based from the base of your project. So if you put, in this case, to create a C sort of slug, I can create routes C slug, some brackets around it, .get.ts, and then that is going to automatically become that's automatically just going to handle that.
So that becomes kind of a controller where you can do stuff.
Exactly.
Mm.
And you can even do something like provider slug and have some sort of nice dynamic parameters there that you can pull in
Wow.
from your server routes.
And so this is now hosted on Vercel. And when I recently did that, even this morning, and then when I noticed when I set it into like the Nitro mode for Vercel, the render mode, it actually puts the whole thing in some. I think I don't know fully how it works, but it seems like it's a serverless function that renders all of Nitro. That's at least
Yes.
how it looks in Vercel. But how does that work with like wake up times and stuff?
So there's pros and cons to having multiple serverless functions for different endpoints and having a single one.
Okay.
And we've adopted a hybrid approach that I think is the sweet spot. Because we've done it that because we think it's the sweet spot. So the Nitro server that you produce is lazy loads the code that it needs. So when you start the Nitro server, it takes 3 milliseconds to cold start. It is incredibly fast.
It's crazy. Yes.
And when a request comes in, if that request needs to load a bundle for one endpoint, then it will load it at that point. It won't load it before that point. Once it's loaded, it's cached in its memory. It won't have to load it again. But the point is that if you were looking to fire up a Nitro server and serve only one request, you're not going to have any of the overhead from the other endpoints. So you don't have the downside of the loading the code and handling all of that in memory. What you do have is the size of the Lambda, which has to be unpacked.
Yes. And run
so
within 10 seconds, but that should normally be fine.
The 10 seconds thing is totally fine because we're not running any extra code. We're only running the code for that response. So we'd have to run that anyway. But what we do gain is if you have 10 serverless functions for 10 different routes, and someone comes and they hit one of the functions, and then a second later they hit another function. Those are 2 cold starts. If they then come and they hit 3, 4, and 5, and 6, every single one is getting a cold start. Whereas if you hit the Nitro approach, we dynamically import what we need when we need it, but we never hit that cold start again until the Lambda actually times out. So if you come in and hit serverless functions 1 through 10 endpoints with Nitro, you have 1 cold start, and then just dynamically importing whatever cost there is to dynamically importing the code for each endpoint, which is much, much, much more performant than having 10 functions. Now that might not always be true in every case, but we think it's probably a pretty good guide in general. Certainly for Nuxt
interesting
projects.
for sure. It sounds cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. Sorry, I was just thinking of like the pages I was rendering when it was in that mode, in that one serverless function. I was doing fetch calls to 3 or 4 things. So my page would this is an interesting thing I saw where you also see how fast Nitro itself is. When I clicked on a link, on a Nuxt link, the URL changed already. The page was there. And then my calls were asynchronously slowly getting done, and then the page would render the rest of the page. And that was like 1 second or something. So there's something there that I need to fix on my end. But when you hit that link, it's directly there. So there's no cold start off the serverless function. But it means you have to think about how you're going to build this now. Because if you're used to let's just do SSG, I don't have to think about how many queries I do. Now with SSR related things, suddenly it's a different game. And that's where this hybrid thing can work, I think.
The biggest blocker with an SSR app, as you say, is things like network requests on the server side. Because basically you absolutely don't want to do anything to delay that first that HTML rendered HTML to the end. And so I would think very carefully even about doing authentication if it's based on making another network request to some other endpoint that's going to tell you if you're authenticated or not, on the server, that is. I mean, if you look at something like Vercel is an interesting example. I think they're quite well known for this. If you load a dashboard page, or you go to a user, like a project page, What you see instantly is a static page with a loading
Exactly. Like an
interaction.
app frame kind of thing. That's what they used to call it, I think.
And exactly, and then obviously they perform the authentication, and you're having some API requests happening, and then you might be redirected to the homepage if you're not signed in.
Yeah.
But they felt it was better to serve something immediately to the user, and then perform auth rather than delay that request for the sake of the auth. And I think in general, I feel very sympathetic to that. It's important to server rendered things, but if you're going to have to delay it by 300 milliseconds to perform some kind of auth call, don't do it. That is too much time to delay a server response. So, and there are tools that actually Nitro gives you to help with that, not with auth. But Nitro can cache arbitrary routes in your app and arbitrary fetches in your app. So if you want to say, for example, that I want to display the content on my homepage based on a fetch request to my CMS, we can use a stale while revalidate strategy to mean that we instantly return a response and refresh it every 100 milliseconds or every second or whatever you want. But the point is it's instantaneous for every single user who hits it.
Okay, so if I hit my homepage and then it's cached in Nitro because I used like a cache key in my fetch call, for every other user that then hits that website, that is also cached then.
It can be, exactly, it can be. I mean, what you'd need to set up a cached event handler within Nitro, or use a root rule to enable caching. So it's
so that I would still have to look at that. Oh, it's interesting.
Basically, we don't do it out of the box because maybe you always need up-to-date information. But all you would need to do in your app to enable, you can cache at different levels, right? You can cache the rendered version of your page. That's the easiest one to do. If you create a key in your Nuxt config called Nitro, and under that routes, and then you under that put something called /**, that will cover your whole site.
Yeah.
And then that key matches SWR, an object, and say SWR is true. And that will basically automatically give you SWR for your entire site. It will feel a little bit like static, because it will be every page will be cached within memory in your Nitro server, and it will be re-rendered on every request, but it will be re-rendered after the request. So
interesting.
You get some really nice immediate out of the box speed from that. That's not, you might also want to cache at different levels. So if you want to cache individual requests, you can create Nitro endpoints for them. And we have a cached event handler, which lets you specify that kind of thing. So this individual request to my CMS can be cached in this kind of way. That's a more granular thing. Maybe if you're reusing it across your app.
And so what happens, and this is going to be an annoying question. So let's say we're using the Vercel Edge, and you are in a different location than I am. So you get a different instance of my app, which then means it has to do the cache for that Edge node as well, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Right? We're not sharing a cache between Edge nodes.
You cannot. That's impossible, I guess.
I think
nothing is impossible, but
it would remove the benefit of the cache if you were then having to go fetch it from the other Edge node. Exactly as you say. So the benefit and the downside of an Edge node is that it's close to the user, but that means that it's also far away from every other Edge node. So it's
exactly.
I think, but it would also work. But yes, you would get less benefit from the SWR. But I think if you're running on Vercel Edge, which is a lot, like obviously it's really a lot faster. But anyway, the very best thing that you can do is not cache the requests. The very best thing you can do is not have the requests in the first place.
Exactly.
And people often don't think about it because they're used to different patterns. Maybe they await one request and then they await another request and then they await another request, which means you're absolutely adding to your time. You can fetch them in parallel if they don't promise all or something like that. Yeah. And even then, create a BFF rather than have some kind of pattern where you need the result of one to get some information for another. Create your own, use Nitro for it even.
Really? Interesting.
So you can do that, and then you can cache it at that level. So you can cache the Nitro response if you need it. But there are things you can do to really improve your performance when it comes to fetching lots of API requests on the server.
And it's interesting. I might be kind of guilty of doing these awaits because I've been doing JAMstack sites for so long because I've never had the real need for SSR. And it's coming more and more. But because of that, I didn't actually care as much about how long these things would take because it's just on build. And then that's the one time 2-minute extra, fine. But actually, we now that we're going back to where you have Nitro and you can think about this data in a different way, we're going to have to relearn a little. So we're coming up on the hour, and I have one last question that could be pretty interesting to see what your viewpoint is there. So when you look at newer tools like something like Astro, where they say, this component, I want some JavaScript. For this one, I don't. For the other one, I want some other type of JavaScript. And then effectively creating something they call island architecture. How is that working? Or at least do you have an opinion on how that could work in Nuxt as well?
So there's a pending PR for Nuxt Islands.
How about that?
Which, but it's. I should say that despite the name, it works very differently from Astro Islands. Nuxt Islands, which was originally called server components, but we have in mind to make them not just server components but client components as well. Is the idea that we can actually render individual components within your app directly from Nitro, which means that we can do things like it enables lots of interesting use cases, like component testing that is based on that you can test components that depend on an entire Nuxt app, but separately from that Nuxt app, which is a very interesting thing to be able to do. It means you can also have components that have hefty dependencies that you don't want to ship to the browser, or have node-only dependencies, things like highlighters, or maybe you want to access privileged data, or you want to access a database in order to render information into a component. You want the component to behave like a Vue component. It needs to be reactive. When you change the props, it needs to update. And this is a different kind of island. This is not an island of interactivity within an otherwise static page. This is almost the reverse. It's an island of HTML within an interactive page. But it enables a lot of very interesting things. And I'm personally looking forward to seeing that PR get merged.
Dude, there's so many things coming in here now that people are going to have to wrap their minds around. The more I learn about it, the more I use it, you see that there's all this whole new paradigm is coming. And I think it kind of makes sense that it's not released yet. You need to have all these things to make this whole new paradigm work. Right? And I think it's actually a good thing that this is now, like, the one thing though is like, how are you going to actually advocate this in the community? Because that's going to be pretty tricky.
Server components, server islands.
All of it. Like even how Nitro works is relatively new for a lot of people.
So
like, I've been around the block for a bit and I'm like, whoa, okay, let's see what we have here. Right? So how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I'll do my best to tell people about things.
Certainly,
I think and there are lots of other people, amazing people out there. You among them, Tim, who
I'm learning a lot as I go, but learning in the community is the way to go. I guess.
And the people who've been with us in the Nuxt 3 release process, right back from the beta days all the way until now. They've had to put up with a lot because obviously we've changed things, and if they were on edge releases, it's an edge release. We're making no guarantees about edge release in terms of its stability, but they've absolutely followed it through, and I see amazing help being offered on the Nuxt Discord server between users who've discovered features and are telling other people about them, and helping each other, which is wonderful. So there's a lot of goodwill out there, and a lot of
clearly
people discovering features too.
You know what? People have said when the RC started to come out, like, oh, you're burning people, it's taking too long. And you know what? I think the opposite is happening. It's getting so much better every time that people are just getting more excited. Like my best YouTube video is from half a year ago with my 5 favorite features of Nuxt 3.
Mm.
And since that time, many more of my favorite features that I have now came out. It's crazy. And that's the video that did the best on my channel. Imagine that. So
Okay.
there's still a lot of fire around it. So it's really, really good. We are coming up on time. Is there anything you still want to share? You want to plug or whatever?
Well, I think we'll have to wait until another day for me to tell you about style inlining, which
Oh
was
yeah,
obviously something else that we built for Nuxt New. But no, there's just so much to talk
style
about, Tim.
inlining. If you have a link, let's put it in the chat. You can even put it in the private chat for me, and then I'll put it in. Oh, we have our Belgian friend Carwack in the chat. Oh wait, you're sharing your screen. Let me just put that in there.
Oh, you're still seeing my screen. That's a good thing. I'm only searching the
Inline styling in Next. No, I just put it back on. I can remove it. It's up to you.
No, that's totally fine. So basically, to enable it, you set experimental render inline styles. If let's see, this little file experimental is the one to check.
Oh yeah.
It has all kinds of interesting little things that you can enable, but in particular, this inline SSR styles will basically, by default now with Nuxt, have a it's default enabled right now. Probably won't be for the stable version. People can opt into it, but what it will do is render, well, as it sounds like, inline styles of the actual styles used by the components rendered in the page, and then it defers the CSS until client side. So it gives a prefetch rather than a preload, meaning that the whole thing should render a lot faster for users, and it should also it removes the need for that extra network request.
And so what if I use Tailwind? How does that compute here?
Still does the same, because Tailwind still adds CSS to the it does it via the PostCSS plugin. The one thing with Tailwind is that there are a lot of global styles that are needed, so variables and things like that. And at the moment, we inline those too. You can disable inlining of global styles by passing a function here. So you can pass this function that receives the ID of the file that it should inline the style into. So it might be a Vue file, or it might be like an entry point file. And a Tailwind, if you're getting an entry point file, that's where it injects the global styles. So
okay, so that's default, literally your tailwind.css file, basically.
Would basically be inlined in HTML out of the box in Nuxt 3.
Well, right now that's the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can turn that off by saying, passing ID, and ID includes .view or something like that. That would restrict it to just a Vue SSVs. Or you can turn it off entirely. But I think there's some really interesting optimizations that we can potentially do here. So, usage-based is already usage-based, but we might also be able to purge styles or figure out what
that's
bits.
what you want.
Absolutely. What I would love, what you want is a fully self-contained HTML response that has the minimum amount of everything that it needs in order to actually deliver a good experience. So, I mean, you don't want flashes as the layout changes, and you don't want information loading later. Having separate CSS files is a really good thing too. In Nuxt 2, you had a binary choice. You either had inline CSS, but in that case, your CSS was in your JavaScript files, and as you, which was bad in general. It's a bad thing, because it means that you have your CSS is being applied to the document from your JavaScript, crossing boundaries. You're not using the browser to do what the browser is good at doing.
Exactly.
Whereas if you have separate CSS files in Nuxt 2, you then didn't have anything in line. So you had a bit of a performance hit. With Nuxt 3, we're trying to hit the hybrid of we want to render the CSS you need to display the page in the HTML. And then from that point onward, it's all going to be fetching the CSS files, which obviously can be cached. You can have some nice benefits there.
Wow. So I'm keeping like I have this website called presskit.timbenniks.dev, which is a one-pager Nuxt 3 with content, and it scores 100% in performance. But I haven't applied any of the things you just told me. So
And you probably don't need to, do you? Like,
I want to. Now I want to. So I'm gonna have to do all that stuff because there's one part of it. If you can go there to presskit.timbenniks.dev, because you're still sharing your screen anyways. If you go downwards, you see how fast this loads. It's crazy,
Yeah,
including
it's
all those custom fonts and the images. I made my own Cloudinary image, so this is not Nuxt image, or it might be. I don't remember.
so fast. Look at that.
It's ridiculously fast. This is on Vercel. You see nothing. It's just solid web dev, I guess, but none of your rules there. However, oh yeah, while you do that, oh, that's interesting.
Page
Oh, remove the S. There we go. No, the dash. Yeah, exactly. This one. I always Google.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, so while you do this, go back and scroll down, and there's my conference talks, and you can click a little button that would load all of them. And right now, here I just do. You saw a little bit of a jump there.
Yeah.
But this is just doing an async data load in Nuxt 3 to an API that I have somewhere in a serverless function that's always there. And when I do hit more, it refreshes the thing with the different query parameter. This is, I guess, where we can do this hybrid thing. This is pretty interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. So that API can then exist within the same deployment. It doesn't need to be an API somewhere else.
And right now it's elsewhere, which works because I use my talks on multiple websites. That's fine, but it is more interesting to package it up in one thing. Not even 100. Oh, that's not good.
Oh, I bet it will be if I click it again. It's a bit finicky, isn't it?
It needs to wake up a bit.
But yeah, those are nice numbers.
And that's Nuxt 3 out of the box without even thinking about performance, right? It's just good CSS and lazy loading images. And I do some smartness, like this image needs to be eager, this one can be lazy, but there's not much more there.
Yeah.
And I try to like not render any JavaScript here, but I want it for the talks below to click on the button.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the kind of thing that we're going to see innovation coming in, and ideas for how do you optimize the JavaScript that we do have and do load.
Yeah.
Vue itself is thinking about this. I mean, listen to Evan talk about Vue Vapor. So there's some really interesting thoughts there about how we render JavaScript for Vue and for Nuxt as well. I think the move from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3 is sort of monolith to a different way of doing things. Composables, for example, really suit tree shaking that well. In Nuxt 2, you just injected like a global plugin, and it was available everywhere in your app, which meant it also, the setup for it was in your page load for your entire app. Whereas in Nuxt 3, you can export functionality as composables, which can be used only when they're required. So it really changes the performance. And Nuxt 3 is so much lighter. You know, the HTTP Almanac says, this year we grew by 8% in terms of JavaScript payloads.
Wow.
Which is terrible. But if you're going from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3, then you'll be dropping your payload by, I think, 50%, a significant amount from Nuxt 2
that
to
is
Nuxt
good
3.
Because I remember timbenniks.dev is still Nuxt 2, and I did so much to optimize the performance, like a lot of things. And it's fine now, and I learned a lot. And then with Nuxt 3, I did nothing, and it was faster, right? So that's pretty amazing. So that's good stuff there.
It really, really makes me glad to hear that.
Well, yeah, and like even though there's lots of things like error handling, I don't know why it doesn't work, and I don't see an error coming from a module or something. There's always some stuff, but it's called development for a reason, right? And most of the times when I ask you, when I do something with Nuxt, turns out it was either something I didn't know because I was not written down, or it was my own mistake, which is generally the one. So there you go. Well, it is what it is.
We certainly can improve the documentation, I think. The
setup of the documentation is great, though, because it gives you the folder structure, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But then now it's very much like a tree and it goes out. So when you click on that folder, then there's like 5 links to other bits. So there's some work there to be done, but you get there.
Yeah, we'll do our best.
Oh, I know that for a fact. Dude, thank you so much. We're a bit over time. I'm trying to keep it around this time. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking about all this fun stuff. And I'm inspired by like 4 things you said. So but I'm too busy to do them. So we'll do them in between. That's how it goes.
Sounds great. Thank you, Tim. It's been a real pleasure to chat.
Same here. Cheers, man. Thanks again. All right. Bye-bye. Or just end the broadcast. How about that?